They say ghosts don't leave fingerprints, but Frank Matthews left millions of them on every dollar that vanished with him. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories that history tried to bury. Brooklyn, 1960s, the kind of neighborhood where every streetlight hummed, and every face knew when to look away. Frank wasn't born into power. He was born into survival. A sharp dresser with sharper instincts, he learned early that opportunity didn't knock, it waited at the corner, counting money. He started small, running numbers, carrying envelopes, watching how men with cigars ran the game. But Frank didn't just watch, he memorized. Every rule. Every mistake. Every betrayal. Don't dream too loud, his uncle once told him. Frank smiled. Then I'll whisper my empire. By 20, he'd already learned the first law of the streets: never chase the money, attract it. But while most hustlers dreamed of cars or women, Frank dreamed of disappearing rich, and soon, he'd learn how to do both. Because once he touched the drug game, ghosts started forming. North Carolina, 1940s, the air was heavy with tobacco and dust. Frank Matthews grew up watching men break their backs in fields while others in pressed suits made fortunes off their labor. He was just a boy, but he understood the system early. The game was never fair, and rules were written to keep certain people down. He wasn't a saint, he was a student. The streets were his first classroom, and survival was the only subject that mattered. He moved like someone always listening, to whispers, to engines, to the sound of opportunity turning a corner. People remembered him for his calm. Frank never raised his voice, said one old friend. But when he looked at you, you either felt safe or finished. By 17, he'd already outgrown small-town limits. The cops knew his name, and so did the hustlers who feared the quiet kid with ambition in his eyes. When he left North Carolina for New York, he didn't tell anyone. No goodbyes, no letters. Just a bus ticket and a promise to himself. I ain't dying broke, and I ain't dying known. That promise would shape everything: his rise, his rules, and his vanishing act. But in Brooklyn, new rules waited, and Frank was ready to rewrite them. Brooklyn, late 1960s, the city pulsed like a restless heart. Street corners were crowded with dealers, dreamers, and desperate men chasing fast money. Frank Matthews arrived quietly, but within months, people were whispering his name in backrooms and barber shops. He started as a small-time bookmaker, running bets from the barber shop to the pool hall. But Frank wasn't content with being a middleman. He studied how heroin moved through the city, who supplied it, who taxed it, and who disappeared when they crossed the wrong man. He found his window through a contact from Philadelphia, a link to Cuban and Dominican suppliers who didn't answer to the Mafia. That was unheard of. The Italians controlled everything back then. But Frank, calm and calculating, built a parallel empire, one they couldn't touch, or even see coming. Let them fight over pennies, he told his crew. We'll take the dollars they don't notice. Within a year, the money flowed faster than the fear. He drove Cadillacs, wore silk suits, and paid his people better than anyone else in the game. Loyalty, in his world, wasn't bought, it was earned. But the higher he rose, the more shadows followed. And one of them wore a federal badge. By the early 1970s, Frank Matthews wasn't just another player, he was the king without a crown. He ran his empire from a modest house in Brooklyn, no marble floors, no golden rings, just quiet order. His operation stretched from New York to Philadelphia, Baltimore to Atlanta, and even beyond. Millions moved through his hands each week, and not a single mob boss could stop him. He broke the unspoken law, he didn't pay tribute to the Mafia. Yet somehow, he survived. Frank earned respect not through fear, but through discipline. He was fair, but firm. If a man stole, he didn't shout, he disappeared. Violence is noise, Frank once told his right-hand man. Silence keeps you rich. He kept books cleaner than accountants, used coded ledgers, and never touched the product himself. The FBI called him one of the most intelligent criminals we've ever seen. His people called him the Ghost. At his peak, he threw a lavish meeting, over 100 dealers from across the country, all united under his rules. For one night, Harlem glittered like Vegas. Money, unity, power, Frank had it all. But power has a scent, and the feds had started to smell it. Success breeds envy, and Frank Matthews had more of both than most men could handle. By 1972, his network had grown too big to stay invisible. Every city had a weak link, a runner who talked too much, a rival who felt overlooked, a lieutenant with eyes on Frank's throne. He trusted few. One of them was Leroy Bobo Johnson, a childhood friend who'd been with him since day one. But Bobo was getting sloppy, flashing money in clubs, bragging about connections. Frank noticed. He always noticed. One night, over a quiet dinner, Frank leaned in and said softly, "Bobo, you ever see a lion chase mice?" Bobo laughed, unsure how to answer. Frank smiled. "That's what I look like when I waste time on betrayal." The next week, Bobo disappeared. No noise. No mess. Just gone, like he never existed. But the silence didn't calm the storm. Rumors began swirling that someone inside was talking to the feds. Frank tightened his circle, but paranoia crept in like smoke under a locked door. His empire was still standing, but the foundation had started to crack. And the FBI was waiting for the first piece to fall. By 1973, the name Frank Matthews was echoing in FBI offices coast to coast. They called him Black Caesar, the man who outsmarted both the Mafia and the feds, and made millions doing it. Agents bugged phones, flipped dealers, traced money trails. But Frank stayed 2 steps ahead. He never used the same phone twice. Meetings were held in motion, car rides, walks through crowded streets, even whispered talks at barber chairs. Still, he could feel it tightening, the invisible net. He stopped sleeping at home, rotated apartments, and trusted no one completely. Even his lover, Barbara, noticed the change. "You don't smile anymore," she whispered one night. He replied quietly, "Smiles are for men who feel safe." The FBI surveillance files described him as unusually composed, even under pressure. But behind that calm exterior, Frank was calculating every move, every dollar, every exit. Then came the break. One of his top distributors got caught in Virginia. Faced with life, the man talked. Names. Dates. Routes. Everything. The walls were closing in, and Frank knew it. But he wasn't planning to go to prison, he was planning to disappear. Frank's hands. The FBI had enough to indict him: drug trafficking, tax evasion, conspiracy. They called it Operation Black Caesar, a full-scale strike against the man they couldn't control. Frank knew the game was over before the headlines did. Agents raided stash houses, seized cars, froze accounts. But when they came for him, he was gone. Witnesses said he was last seen walking his dog outside his house, wearing a gray suit and no fear in his eyes. The next morning, his lawyer got a call. Frank had skipped bail, $15 million vanished with him. They searched everywhere, New York, Miami, the islands, nothing. No body, no trail, no word. He didn't run, one old associate said. He executed a plan. In the underworld, his legend grew. Some said he fled to Africa, others swore he lived quietly under another name. The FBI called it the most sophisticated escape in American crime history. But to Frank, it was just the final move in a game he'd been playing all his life, the art of vanishing without dying. Frank Matthews never set foot in a cell, but for a man who vanished, isolation was his new prison. Whether he hid in the Caribbean, South America, or somewhere no one would ever guess, the silence was his only company. He had escaped the FBI, but not the weight of being invisible. He traded noise for freedom, luxury for loneliness. No phone calls. No family. No past. Some say he lived in Venezuela under another name, running a small business and feeding stray dogs at night. Others swear he died years later, buried in an unmarked grave. But those who knew him best believed something different, that he was too smart to die small. One man who once worked for him claimed, "Frank sent me a postcard, years later. No address, no name. Just 2 words, still free." If it was real, it meant Frank had done what no one else ever could, walked away from the biggest game in the world and stayed gone. Yet freedom came at a cost. He became a myth, not a man. And in that quiet exile, myth became his cage. Decades passed, and Frank Matthews' name turned from headline to whisper, then from whisper to legend. The kids on the corners didn't know his face, but the old-timers still spoke of him like a ghost who once walked among kings. They said he was different, that he built an empire without spilling blood on his own hands, that he ran his business cleaner than any mob accountant. He taught loyalty, discipline, and respect, rules that outlived him. Some claimed he was still alive in the 90s, living quietly in Africa, gray hair, dark glasses, feeding birds outside a small cafe. If true, he'd be in his 70s, the age where a man stops counting money and starts counting days. He had no statues, no songs, no grave, but his story became a quiet rebellion against a system that said he could never win. Frank beat them all, one retired agent admitted. "We caught everyone but him." His ghost became a lesson, not in crime, but in control. The power to walk away, to rewrite your own ending, to live unseen in a world obsessed with being noticed. But even ghosts have reflections, and Frank's was still watching. If Frank Matthews is still alive, he'd be an old man now, walking slow, eyes steady, carrying the weight of everything he escaped. No entourage. No limousines. Just time. The one thing no man, not even a kingpin, can outsmart. His story isn't about drugs or money. It's about control, the discipline to move in silence when the world demands noise. He lived by rules that few could understand. Never show greed, never trust applause, and when the game turns on you, exit with grace. Most men die proving a point, he once told an associate. "I'd rather live proving I don't need to." Maybe he found peace in anonymity, fishing at dawn, drinking coffee in a city where no one knew his name. Or maybe he's long gone, and what remains is just the myth of a man who refused to lose on anyone else's terms. Frank Matthews didn't just disappear, he became a mirror for every hustler who ever dreamed of freedom. He outlived the world he built, not because he was lucky, but because he never broke his word. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gangster stories like this one.